So let's talk about course components. First part is readings. As far as I'm concerned, nearly every university course in the humanities needs to have at its core a group of readings. And this course is no different. The good news is that you don't need to purchase any of these readings, as they are all available online, free of charge. So why these particular readings? Each in its own way provides an interesting insight into the climate crisis. Not only what it is, but what we can do about it. Some, like Henry David Thoreau's Walden, published in 1854, and Vance Packard's The Wastemakers, which is, well, as old as I am, they have nothing to say about the climate crisis. Yet both writers seriously question the lifestyle choices that have profoundly exacerbated the crisis. Unfortunately, we largely ignored both writers on this count. Oh, there is still time to act on what they had to say. Others, like The Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace Wells, look squarely at the climate crisis and its future and what the future may hold for us if we don't respond to the crisis immediately. Still others, like Why Scientists Disagree About Global Warming, have been generated by fossil fuel interests in order to cause us to doubt that there is even a crisis. The goal is not necessarily to convince us that the climate crisis does not exist, but rather to raise doubts in our minds about what its nature is and its severity so that we'll be slow to act, thereby allowing the fossil fuel industry to continue business as usual for as long as possible. While this might be good for their bottom line in the short term, it would be disastrous for the future of our planet. Having read all or most of these texts, you should have a better idea of what the climate crisis is and what each of us can do about it. The second part are documentaries. While it's certainly true that a writer can be incredibly expressive, a picture, and in some cases even better, moving pictures with a thoughtful script and an exciting soundtrack, can add something entirely new to the equation. In a variety of different ways, all of our course films take up the climate crisis. However, they do so in distinctly different ways. Some take up the job of introducing the sheer breadth of the problem, while others focus in on specific aspects of the problem. Others lay out the problem, while others offer up solutions. Some take a somewhat detached stance, while others are far more personal, introducing us to the people who are rolling up their sleeves and doing something about the crisis. In some cases, these people have made radical changes to their lives. Not all these films are perfect. Some even have major flaws, like Cowspiracy, which greatly exaggerates the impact that the switch to a largely plant-based diet could make. So why then recommend such a film? Every one of these films made me stop and think and taught me something new. In some cases, they are also all that is available, so we have to watch them. Just watching these films will likely give you a better understanding of the climate crisis and what people are doing about it. Look at it this way. In the same amount of time that it would take to binge watch a single season of a TV show, you can get an interesting window into the climate crisis and what we can do about it just by watching these films. Are there documentaries for English 22 and 23 that are the same? In fact, half of them are the same, roughly speaking. Does this mean that you will be again watching the same films all over again in English 23 if you've already taken English 22? No. As each week there are alternate films to watch. In other words, if you have already had the other large lecture, by the end of this course you will have watched a whole new group of documentaries. In the process, your understanding of a variety of issues will hopefully deepen. Let's take, as an example, food systems. The primary documentary on this topic is Cowspiracy, The Sustainability Secret, which explores the environmental and climate implications of a plant-based diet. If you have not already seen Cowspiracy, you should watch this film. However, if you have already seen Cowspiracy, the alternate documentary is Wasted, the story of food waste, which takes up the issue of food waste both in the U.S. and globally. Interesting, everyone switching to plant-based diets would not make as big a dent in the climate crisis as eliminating food waste would. Since waste it addresses the other half of the food system problem with respect to the climate crisis, having watched it and Cowspiracy together would give you a particularly good handle on this particular topic. If you have not taken the other large lecture but find some of the alternate films intriguing, please feel free to watch them along with the documentaries, the primary ones. So how is the discussion of the documentaries and readings related? Well, there are a range of different ways of conducting a classroom. There are two time-honored approaches that stand out, the lecture and the discussion section. In a lecture, the instructor carefully prepares and structures all of the material. Students are not generally much involved in the process. In contrast, in a discussion seminar, not only are students themselves heard, but they actually play an important role in deciding what it is that they will, learn and discuss. Consequently, I definitely prefer discussion seminars over lectures. In practice, many instructors, myself included, use a mix of lecture and discussion together. For example, if we are discussing a particular reading, I generally deliver a little lecture, usually under 10 minutes or so, explaining why I chose this particular reading and its significance. The idea here is to frame the material and give students some important and often necessary background. Once I have given this mini lecture, I then open up the room for comments and questions. From this point on, students not only learn from me, but from each other. The latter is a particularly important point because as this is what separates a discussion from a lecture. Students obviously learn from each other by hearing what their classmates think about the readings at hand, obviously. However, once we have shifted from the initial mini-lecture to discussion mode, students are largely in control of the classroom and what will be learned there. Although some professors take a heavy hand and attempt to, wrestle control back, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, I am of the mind that, especially with a topic like the climate crisis, students should have a major role to play in what they are learning. So allow me to explain. Once students start making comments and asking questions about readings, they are identifying what they believe are important points in the text, either to simply draw attention to them or to try to understand them better, often by asking for clarification from the instructor. From an instructor's point of view, at this point, we're, off script, as the comments and the questions will no longer be responsible for what is learned in that class. I think this is absolutely terrific. If one or more students focuses in on a particular issue in the text that they found important, this draws my attention to it, gets me thinking about it. In contrast, in a lecture, I may have glossed over this particular point altogether. However, thanks to the intervention of the student or students here, that won't be allowed to happen. One of the reasons that I personally find this approach so appealing is because it often makes me think about the text at hand in ways that may not have occurred to me before. Because the subject is the climate crisis, I get to see the crisis through the eyes of my students, such as what they think is important, what angers them, what worries them, what doesn't, and so forth. Hence, unlike when I deliver a prepared lecture, I often learn a great deal during a discussion. Of course, there are times when I will lead the discussion toward a particular issue if that has not yet been broached. However, it has been my experience that during doing so is not, often unnecessary, because it's often unnecessary, as particularly perceptive students will often have already pointed us there. It might seem that because Climate Crisis 101 is such a large class, meaningful discussion would not be possible. However, not only do we have discussions, I am of the mind that our discussions are far more meaningful precisely because of the size, thanks to YouTube and more accurately to the online forum that YouTube provides by way of its components. or its comment section. Because there are hundreds of comments and questions in a class the size of Climate Crisis 101, this allows me to select and respond to particularly interesting and relevant ones. And two, this means that I generally learn from a class this size, as there are many interesting and at times provocative perspectives and observations. Seriously, when Climate Crisis 101 is taking place, I find myself returning to the YouTube comments throughout the day. These discussions, online comments, can be really exciting. In any event, the introduction to these course readings that follow have two parts. This is in order to emulate a discussion seminar. First, I start with a mini lecture of 10 minutes or so. This is what I would do to begin any discussion seminar. After that, just like in a discussion seminar, I respond to comments and questions from my students. These are generally, since there are, hundreds of these comments from which to choose, I carefully go through them in advance in order to find the most instructive. Because these students are obviously not in the room with me, I first read aloud the comment that I address. Sometimes students ask me questions to which I don't have an answer. This almost always pleases me because I have the advantage of time in preparing a response. This allows me to do a little research if necessary. Sometimes I'll actually provide links to this research. Since one of the forms the Climate Crisis 101 takes as a book, I am able to embed links directly into my responses. Having the advantage of time, I am also able to think through my responses in advance. As far as I'm concerned, this makes them more thoughtful and, simply better. So, in short, each of the sections in this chapter is an introduction to a particular reading. But there are more than that. As each emulates, I would argue that each actually is a discussion seminar. Okay, thanks.